Good evening. I want to thank you for joining us in this information session focused on the Capital Regional District's 2025 Provisional Financial Plan. My name is Cliff McNeil-Smith, and I'm honored to serve as the board chair for the Capital Regional District. To start, it's important to acknowledge that the CRD conducts its business within the territories of many First Nations, including Paquachin, Malahat, Penelakut, Pachidat, Beecher Bay, Songhees, Sayout, Sauk, Sartlip, Sycam, and Esquimalt, all of whom have a long-standing relationship with the land and waters from time immemorial that continues to this day. Today, we'll provide an overview of our planning procedures and discuss how we align our services with community needs and considering the impact on taxpayers. This session will be recorded, so those who cannot attend can still benefit from the insights shared during the presentation and the Q&A session. I would like to now introduce our CRD executive leadership team. To my left, Ted Robbins, our Chief Administrative Officer. To my right, Nelson Chan, our Chief Financial Officer and General Manager, Finance and Technology Services. And participating virtually and on your screen, and please give us a little wave, Alicia Fraser, General Manager of Infrastructure and Water Services. Glenn Harris, Acting General Manager of Parks, Recreation and Environmental Services. Kevin Lorette, General Manager of Housing, Planning and Protective Services. And Kristen Morley, General Manager of Corporate Services and our Corporate Officer. In just a moment, Ted Robbins and Nelson Chan will start with a presentation about the Capital Regional District, our planning process, and the specifics of the 2025 Provisional Financial Plan. Their presentation will take approximately 35 minutes. After the presentation, our executive leadership team and I will be available to answer any questions you have. Please use the Zoom Q&A tool for your questions so we can keep track of them. And remember, the name you registered with will appear next to your question. You can pose those questions during the presentation or afterwards during the Q&A. Sudha Krishna, our Manager of Social Marketing, will assist us during the Q&A period by reading your questions out loud. And after the Q&A, I'll have some brief closing remarks. So thank you again for being here tonight, and without further delay, I'd like to invite Ted Robbins and Nelson Chan to present the details of our Provisional Financial Plan.
Thank you very much, Cliff, for the introduction, and good evening to those of you that have joined our virtual 2025 CRD Budget Information Session. As the Chair said, my name is Ted Robbins, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Capital Regional District. And thank you for taking the time to learn more about the CRD's provisional budget that the board will consider adopting in March. So we do have several slides, as the chair noted, to guide our presentation this evening, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation about the consolidated budget. You can also ask questions about the various services the CRD provides across the region, but I do ask, as the chair noted, that we hold your questions until the end of the presentation. So with that, let's get to the presentation. Just in terms of what we're going to present this evening, we're going to provide an overview of the CRD and regional districts in general. Then I'll be highlighting the CRD board's priorities this term and the work of the CRD board during the last 2 years and what's planned for this year, 2025, and how that work that is planned and the direction the board provides impacts the 2025 budget. Then Nelson will speak to the provisional budget details and the consolidated operating and capital financial plans, and then we can take questions. Just for some context to start with, the Capital Regional District covers a large area, about 237,000 hectares to be exact, and the population of the entire capital region currently sits at almost 440,000 people. The Capital Regional District is comprised of 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas, and there are at least 18 First Nations who identify parts of the capital region as traditional territory, 11 of which have reserve lands and settlements within the region, and many of which receive CRD services either directly or indirectly through their neighboring municipalities. So what are regional districts anyway? Well, regional districts are an order of government established by letters patent in British Columbia in 1966. And as a result, we have quite a unique local government structure here in BC compared to the rest of Canada. There are 27 regional districts in the province, And regional districts really arose out of a need for greater regional cooperation on regional and sub-regional issues and service delivery. And today, regional districts have three primary functions. First, the CRD, in our case, provides region-wide services such as solid waste management, parks, and regional planning. Regional districts also provide inter-municipal or sub-regional services that can be delivered more effectively and efficiently through a shared service delivery model, whereby residents only pay for the services they receive. And for the most part, the services the municipalities participate in are their choice. And then finally, regional districts act as the general local government for the unincorporated electoral areas and provide local services such as water and fire protection services to the local communities. And of course, in the CRD, we have three electoral areas, being the Salt Spring Island electoral area, the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area, and the Juan de Fuca electoral area. In addition, you might know the CRD operates three corporate entities. So in addition to the Capital Regional District and its board, we operate the Capital Regional Hospital District, which was incorporated in 1967 by way of the Hospital District Act to mandate the sharing of capital costs for regional health facilities. And the Hospital District Board was established in 1974. We also operate the Capital Region Housing Corporation, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the CRD with a mandate to develop, manage, and deliver affordable housing across the capital region. And the same administrative support structure applies to all three entities. As we start the third year of the CRD Board's four-year term, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the decisions and actions that were implemented over the last 2 years that will influence the 2025 work plan and budget. Beginning with the board's approval of the strategic priorities and the 2023 to 2026 corporate plan. As you'll see from this slide, the board has set transportation, housing, climate action and the environment, First Nations, and governance as the 5 priority areas this term. And with that, there are 134 new initiatives that will be delivered this term in support of the board's strategic priorities, which are critical to our program of work, and several are proposed for 2025. And I do encourage you to take a moment, if you have time, to look at the 2023 to 2026 corporate plan, which is available on the CRD website. This slide presents the key initiatives and major activities completed or planned by priority. So as you can see, there is work planned this year to complete the establishment of a regional transportation service and food lands access service. We're planning to advance the development of more affordable housing units, including the completion of the Caledonia project this year. We hope to receive provincial approval on the CRD's long-term biosolids management strategy. And as well, we want to make progress in establishing new service agreements with First Nations. And of course, beyond this, there's significant work that happens every day to deliver CRD services that are essential to our region, including regional drinking water, wastewater treatment, solid waste management, and regional parks, just to name a few. In terms of where we are in the budget process, this gives you a sense of the timeline associated with our financial planning and service planning process. The CRD board has approved the 2025 provisional budget that was approved last October, and we are currently receiving feedback on the budget and financial plan while our finance staff finalize year-end results. And then the final budget with any amendments or adjustments will be approved by the board by the end of March this year. And then after that, we start the planning process for the 2026 budget. So it's an ongoing process. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Nelson Chan, who's going to provide some more regional context before getting into the budget details. Nelson.
Thank you, Ted. Before I get started, I'd be remiss if I didn't take just a brief moment to extend a deep appreciation on behalf of the executive, on behalf of the board, to all of our standing and advisory committee members, our commission members, and all the volunteers dedicating their time to oversee and govern services for our collective communities. I'd also like to take the opportunity to recognize staff across the organization for their contributions to the many, many service areas that the CRD delivers. This provisional budget is the culmination of a lot of work across various departments, spanning the regional district, the hospital district, and the housing corporation. Finally, I'd especially like to acknowledge staff in the Financial Services Division whose professionalism, commitment, and expertise were essential to the completion of this provisional budget and financial plan. Contextually speaking, on a region basis, this is a slide that we use that we track both external and growth indicators. In the top left, you can see forecasted building permits and housing starts within the region. 2024 was pretty much a flat year compared to 2023. Roughly equal value in permits and housing starts for 2024, but can really see a significant growth on a continual basis. With respect to the average price of single-family dwellings, that's down about 2.8% year over year, and that's for a single-family dwelling. And you can really see the impact of housing policies provincially, interest rates federally, and really even BC Assessments released their assessment notices just after the new year. And you can see that trend continuing into 2024. With respect to services and population growth, our population in the capital region has grown about 23% over the last 15 years or so. Ted had mentioned approaching 440,000 residents. I will note that that is a census number from 2022, so a little bit higher than that for sure. And with that population brings increased wear and tear and asset utilization. We had more than 8 million visits to our CRD regional parks in 2023. Significant impact asset utilization, but that's what they're there for. They're there for the public, but certainly has some challenges on operating maintenance of these services. Also in 2024, and I will note that this presentation did come as part of the public engagement practice. So you'll note that the Greater Victoria CPI, the note there is from September of 2024. I can tell you now that year end is finished. BC Stats just published this. It went down a little bit. It's about 2.5% CPI in Greater Victoria. And the unemployment rate rose a little bit to 3.5% in the region at year end, noting that is one of the lowest in the country. So a number of challenges organizationally that we face, difficult to find skilled labor, and increasing pressures and impacts as it relates to inflation in delivery of services. So just contextually, some of the challenges that we're facing as we deliver these services to our communities. Also, just to touch really briefly on affordable housing, Mr. Robbins had mentioned that's a key priority for the board identified in the strategic and corporate plan. And since 2019, we've added to date over 800 new dwellings, and over the next 5 years plan to add another 900. That will more than double our total number of units by the end of this fiscal plan. The Capital Regional Housing Corporation is the second largest nonprofit housing provider in the province, expected to have just over 2,900 units by the end of the fiscal plan. As mentioned, by comparison, Metro Vancouver operates the largest nonprofit housing corporation. They have 3,400 units. Given size, population, scope, I'd certainly say that we're punching above our weight, and the Housing Corporation is doing a fantastic job meeting the board priorities. Oops. As it relates to our financial plan, one of the things that we bring forward to the board are planning guidelines. Annually, I bring forward a planning guidelines report, which details a number of initiatives, but essentially the main purpose is to collectively provide staff with a path forward through service planning and through the upcoming year. In 2025, there were key financial management strategies highlighted within the report, but really trying to manage cost inflation, cost impacts and inflation while delivering on key priorities. With that in mind, I would say that this slide here shows a representation of performance against the planning guidelines over the last 5 years. I'll start with the top half there. On a consolidated basis, you'll see in 2024, the 2024 budget was roughly a 3.8% increase on requisition. And the 2025 preliminary budget that we're presenting is 5.5% on requisition. For the average household assessment of roughly $1.1 million, that 5.5% increase represents about $38 per household. The average household contributes approximately $728 per household to CRD services. As mentioned, the bar chart at the bottom shows performance, green being the preliminary budget and dark blue being the final budget. Overlaying the red line is where CPI landed. And staff take the direction through the financial planning guidelines, take the corporate plan and all of the priorities and bring initiatives forward to advance those priorities and recognize the commitments that the board made to advancing against those key strategic priorities. Some of the more particulars around the 2025 provisional budget. As Mr. Robbins had mentioned, there are three main entities. The Capital Regional District itself, that's represented by the green box at the top. The Hospital District, represented by the light blue box, and the Housing Corporation, which sits a little bit off to the side, and I'll get to that in a minute. But on a consolidated basis of the three entities, that's nearly $900 million in operating and capital for 2025. The Regional District is funded in a combination of different funding sources. Requisition, you can see there, comprises of about $114 million of the 411 operating and 283 capital. The requisition increase on the Regional District is roughly 6.9%. When you combine and consolidate that with the Hospital District, requisition of 26 million, which is 0%, so no change in the Hospital District, that comes back to the consolidated 5.5% requisition or property tax increases for the 2025 budget. As I mentioned, the Housing Corporation does sit out on its own because that is entirely funded. The operations of the Housing Corporation are entirely funded by grants, subsidies, and tenant rents. So there is no impact on property taxes as it relates to the Housing Corporation. All in all, the provisional budget delivers four key takeaways. They're identified at the bottom there. I would certainly say we're managing significant capital investments, delivering nearly 5 times the amount of capital investment over and above depreciation. So as assets depreciate, our investment is over and above that to the order of magnitude of 5 times. And that really signals a growing region, whether it be in population, in service delivery, and so on. So really investing in those assets for sustainable service delivery. We're doing that in a fiscally responsible way. Supporting corporate and board priorities, we continue multi-year projects identified throughout the corporate plan. There was a slide earlier on that. Then there's a lot of different action items that span multiple years. So we continue to deliver that through 2025. And we're doing it adapting to a number of regional challenges. I previously mentioned some of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, still grappling with heightened inflation, supply chain issues, and so on, and doing it in a financially sustainable way. Specifically on our Capital Regional District capital plan, our capital plan this year, as I had mentioned earlier, is about $283 million. That's an increase of roughly 17 million or 6.3%. That 283 million goes into a number of areas that's represented by the chart on the left. Where does it go? Mostly in engineered structures. That includes buildings, pipes, and so on. There's land, vehicles, and equipment, and so on that deliver those services, assets to deliver those services. And we fund that through a combination of debt borrowing, funding with cash on hand through operating budgets, reserves, grants, and so on. That capital program, 283 million, is distributed across a number of community needs identified here. No question, no surprise, significant capital investment in water and wastewater infrastructure. They're signaled there. Some key projects include a really significant land acquisition there was a news release on that about a week ago, securing a really strategic piece of land for the Greater Victoria water supply up in our watershed, but a number of supply mains and infrastructure projects, some of them highlighted there. Certainly, we continue work on the core area wastewater program, a number of initiatives and infrastructure projects, pump stations and so on, supporting that service. But certainly a lot more details within the package are included on each one of these community needs and each one of these capital projects, but can certainly take any questions on that through the Q&A. On the Capital Regional District operating plan for 2025, it's roughly $411 million. That's an increase of about $42 million from the prior year, or about 11.5%. So what do we spend that on, or where does the money go? You can see on the left diagram there, most of it in operations. And as an operating budget, you would expect it to be in operations. And this is to run, maintain all of the assets and deliver all of the services and programming across the regional district. Certainly part of our operating budgets fund capital, we transfer to reserves, and so on. And how do we fund this operating budget? Separated by the right graph there. Nearly half of our operating budget is funded through sale of services. And requisition, that's really another word for property taxes. You can see less than 25% of our operating budget is funded by property taxes. And that number we've been driving that number down over the years. I think when I started with the Capital Regional District in 2016, requisitions funded nearly 30% of our operating budget. So driving that down is managing some fiscal responsibility and property tax burdens and affordability on ratepayers. Similar to the capital plan, we take our operating budget and we drive it out by community need. Again, no surprise, a significant portion of our operating budget is to fund water and wastewater operations. Some of those key initiatives are listed there. The daily operations for delivering about more than $1.6 billion in infrastructure, asset management of water and wastewater, critically important to ensure the Greater Victoria water supply, but certainly solid waste, recycling, the operations of the Heartland landfill, lots of work happening up there. Strong support for arts and recreation. The Capital Regional District operates 3 significant rec centers, Panorama Rec Center up in the peninsula, Sea Park out in Souk, and the Rainbow Road on Salt Spring Island recreation services out there on Rainbow Road. And of course, the extensive regional park network, more than 33 regional parks spanning over 13,000 hectares. Certainly a lot of operating and maintenance in our regional park network. Just touching briefly back on how do we fund the operating budget, you might recognize this diagram from the previous slide. That pie donut chart there. As I mentioned, less than 25%, less than a fourth of it, or 23% goes to requisitions or property taxes. And you can just reminding the split between the regional district and the hospital district for a combined impact of around 5.5% increase in 2025. I always say no financial presentation would be complete without a really ugly slide table with lots of numbers on it. Here's a split between all of the municipalities and how all of those numbers total 5.5%. So depending on the participation of municipalities in the various services that the CRD supports, there would be differentiating or fluctuating amounts, and you can find your municipality listed on this table. I will also note that staff did present a 5.5% budget to the board. There is a little footnote at the bottom there where the board directed, approved, endorsed additional initiatives on top of that, particularly around Foodlands Access Service, the implementation of a regional transportation service, and a regional supportive housing assessment. That impacts the budget slightly. And you can see those numbers there at the bottom. It'll add about 0.6% to that property tax lift for a total of about 6.1%. Also, very briefly, just want to touch on the funding of the operating. I had mentioned nearly half of the operating budget is funded by sale of services. This is what I mean by that. sale of water rates, the landfill, and certainly through our recreation centers. So some of the increases on rates are listed here. And again, if you have any further questions on that, we can circle back on that in the Q&A. My last slide, almost last slide. Also, over the next 5 years, the 5-year plan that's being submitted, this is a consolidated forecast of our property taxes or requisition over the next 5 years. The black line or the middle line is what the current financial plan shows. So as I keep mentioning, the 5.5%, we'll need to adjust it with those board directed approvals when we took it forward to around 6.1. But 2026, 27, 28, 29, the black line or middle line sort of shows what's currently in the financial plan, which obviously begs the question, what's the red line? The red line would be items or initiatives that we know about, but that are not included in the financial plan because we don't have definitive timing or scheduling on them. Some of that includes, as I mentioned, the food land access and transportation services. There was a land banking and housing initiative, a loan authorization to support accelerating housing, which is identified as a board priority. So if we implement all of those things, it will push towards the red line and essentially increasing the forecast as we move forward. The green line is sort of our best case scenario, and that's impacted by a number of items, including interest rate forecasts, debt servicing costs. But certainly if the board directed the Capital Regional District to stop doing things, then we would be able to drive towards the green line or perhaps even lower than that. With that, I'll close and I'll come back on sort of our 4 key takeaways on our 2025 budget, just to reiterate that we're managing our capital investments, investing in those key critical infrastructure and assets to deliver sustainable services. We're doing it in a fiscally responsible way while supporting board and corporate priorities identified within the strategic and corporate plan. Managing our way through a number of regional challenges that I'm sure everyone is facing, from unemployment to inflation to supply chain, and obviously striving for financial sustainability for the region. So with that, happy to hand this back to Chair McNeil-Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nelson and Ted, for an informative presentation. We'll now move to the question and answer portion of the session. As indicated earlier, Sudha Krishna will kindly support us by reading out any questions that you have submitted or will submit now. And I'll turn to Sudha for if there is a first question, please.
Thank you, Chair McNeil-Smith. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's participated in this session. Thank you for coming out on this January evening. And I'll give it a few seconds to see what questions may pop up. But if not, we may call it an early evening. But in the meantime, just know that you can always go to crd.bc.ca to learn more about the CRD. And so with that, I don't see any specific questions arising at the moment. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair McNeil-Smith, for our closing remarks.
Thank you, Sudha. And thank you again to those participating this evening for joining this information session. Your participation and questions are valuable as we shape the future of the Capital Regional District. Moving forward, your feedback remains essential. Whether you've joined tonight or you're watching a recording of this session at a later date, your interest in being informed and involved makes a big difference. So please continue to share your thoughts, concerns, ideas with us through our online engagement platform. The link is getinvolved.crd.bc.ca. Again, that is getinvolved, all one string, .crd.bc.ca. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
And it seems like we have a late entry as a question. So let me reopen our session very quickly. It is from Marg Gardner, and I assume that could be our Victoria councillor, but I don't know for sure. And her question is, please identify each AAP process underway. So Ted, did you want to pick that up and perhaps address the AAP process and the ones that we currently have either active or live or pending, I guess?
Yeah, thank you, Suda. And in fact, I'm going to have Kristen Morley, our corporate officer, who's leading those processes, respond. Of course, 2 AAPs just closed last week, and we have one that's pending, but I'll have Kristen just provide a summary of the current status. Kristen?
As we just managed some technical difficulties here in terms of audio, just please stand by and we'll see if we can unmute her.
And maybe while that's happening, Suda, I can start with a response. So
Sure.
as I noted, we had 2 AAP processes close last week. So the approval processes to seek approval to establish the 2 regional services, the Foodlands Access Service and the Regional Biodiversity Service, like I say, closed last week. Based on the results, we have the approval to proceed with establishing those services. We'll be providing a report to the board at the February board meeting, which will allow us to advance establishment of those services. We were hoping to also advance the process, the AP process regarding the regional transportation service. We are still in discussion with the province, answering a few outstanding questions with the Inspector of Municipalities. So we'll likely be initiating the AAP process for the regional transportation service either late this quarter or the beginning of Q2 in 2025. There will be other AAP processes that will likely be undertaken over the course of this year. Of course, there are typically AAP processes required for loan authorization bylaws, depending on the nature of the financing requirement. But we will be obviously providing adequate notification and opportunity for the public to respond as those processes are advanced over the course of this year. Happy to take any follow-up questions. Thanks.
Yeah, it looks like Councillor Gardner has a follow-up question about the amounts. Perhaps I can suggest, Councillor Gardner, that we can follow up with her about the amounts requested in the AAPs. I know both our biodiversity and Foodlands, those are on our getinvolved.bc.crd.bc.ca site. So Councillor Gardner can certainly refer to those sites, and we can also follow up with her personally in terms of any amounts that she wants in terms of pending AAPs. Would that be a suitable, Chair Robbins?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. And yes, I think I answered Councillor Gardner's questions here. She was curious about the numbers in terms of dollar requests associated with each AAP. I think as opposed to going through each during this particular session, it would be more appropriate if I give her much more detailed answers about dollar amounts through a follow-up email and conversation.
Yes, we'd be very happy to do that.
And with that, I turn it back. Since there's no other questions from any other folks in this webinar, I will turn it back to Chair McNeil-Smith for final closing remarks.
Thank you again, Suda. And thank you again to all who have joined the meeting this evening. Your input is of value to us. And thank you again. Have a nice evening.